Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of our favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're diving back into TellTale Games The Walking Dead Season 2, looking at Episode 4. In case you missed Season 1, or any of the other previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Episode 4 is titled Amid the Ruins, and we pick up right where Episode 3 left off, with Sarita being bitten as the group is fleeing Carver's compound. Things aren't looking good as Carlos has been shot, causing Sarah to flee, and the rest of the group seems to have scattered to the wind. As Sarita stands there, a look of shock on her face, we have to make a decision about whether to put our axe into the zombie or Sarita's arm. The actual decision was made at the end of the last episode, but this is where we see the fallout. Ideally, we would remove the bitten limb in the hopes of saving her life, much like how Reggie was saved. But, given the situation, that isn't going to work. Cutting her arm off in the middle of a herd of zombies will only bring more dead to attack as she screams in pain. Taking out the zombie at least gives the chance to cut her arm off later, hopefully before it's too late and when there isn't a herd surrounding her. Kenny and Mike run over after Clem takes care of the zombie, and, grabbing her hand, they take off into the herd. Clementine tries to follow, but she can't keep up and finds herself struggling to find anyone to help as she walks among the dead. We see a brief glimpse of Luke and Nick, with Nick taking a bullet to the shoulder before running off, and several moments pass before Clem finally sees a friendly face of Rebecca. As she's trying to convince Rebecca to move through the thick herd, they run into Jane, who's moving slowly and trying to keep in character as a zombie. They beg her to help them through the mess, and while she refuses at first, she finally relents and leads them out of the darkness, using a zombie as a shield. Free of the herd, Clem, Rebecca, and Jane follow a path that eventually leads them to the place where they all agreed to meet up. Along the way, however, we get a peek at Jane's thought process in the form of several comments, including hinting that Rebecca needs to walk faster or risk being left behind. Given all she's been through and how close she is to giving birth, these comments seem callous at best. As they stop to rest, an argument breaks out between Rebecca and Jane, as the latter insinuates that they might have to consider not keeping the baby if they can't find the rest of the group, as they have no way to provide for it. On the surface, this line of thinking seems logical, albeit emotionally cold. Having a baby in the modern world is tough for a lot of people. Having one in a situation where food and resources are scarce seems impossible. But the argument also reveals a little about Jane's past, as it's hinted that her sister died at some point after the outbreak started. She seems hesitant to invest emotionally, and some of that could be tied to that loss. But learning more about Jane will have to wait, as the group finally arrives at the Civil War Memorial, finding Bonnie and Mike along with Kenny and a dying Sarita. When Clementine tries to talk to Kenny, he only throws anger back at her. He's devastated at losing Sarita, and at the moment he needs somewhere to place the blame. Clementine was near her when she was bitten, so in Kenny's mind, she was at least partially responsible. That line of thinking might not make a lot of sense logically, but grieving minds are rarely logical. After dealing with Kenny, Clem and Jane go out looking for a safe place for the group to go. This adventure winds up being more than a scouting trip, however, as Jane spends a lot of time trying to convince Clem that she is better than the group that she's with. In Jane's view, the group is falling apart, and it isn't worth the effort of trying to make things better. She seems to be pushing Clementine into leaving, setting out on her own. And that brings up something we've only lightly touched on in prior episodes. Is being in a group actually worth it? We talked a little bit about this in the 400 Days episode when we watched as the gas station group fell apart. But it isn't just that group that we've seen struggle. In Season 1, the group at the motor inn struggled to keep things together, lasting only a few strenuous months before unraveling. In that instance, a struggle for power between Kenny and Lily, coupled with a mistake by Ben, cost them the place they'd been calling home, before the group started to really disintegrate, as Lily killed either Doug or Carly before being left behind. They also lost Katja and Duck, with Chuck, Lee, Kenny, and Ben all either dying or being separated from the group in the following days. In 400 days, we see what appears to be a rather stable group fall apart in a matter of weeks, after a disagreement on what to do with a man who was caught stealing food turns into a power struggle and a dictatorship. Then, in this season, we see the small group that Clem stumbles into fall apart as they are reintegrated into a bigger group that they'd left after it too became a dictatorship. Groups seem to fall apart before they even have a chance to establish themselves. On the other hand, being solo comes with a lot of risks when it comes to dealing with zombies and finding food. There's safety in numbers, as you have someone to watch your back, and problem solving is a lot easier when you have others to bounce ideas off of, as someone else might be seeing something in a way that you didn't see it. As a general rule, human beings are a social species, and we do best when we have others to socialize with. Being part of a community has a lot of health benefits too, as noted in a 2015 article published in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, linked down in the description below. Quote, "From the current body of medical research, it is evident that social connection has substantial impacts in many categories of health, from weight management, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and depression. Some psychiatrists go so far as comparing social connection to vitamins. Just as we need a vitamin C each day, we also need a dose of the human moment, positive contact with other people." End quote. So being part of a group, even a small one, is important to our overall health and well-being. This would be even more true in a situation like the zombie apocalypse, where the chance of dying has risen exponentially and any benefit would be important. Just as finding food and shelter gives you an increased chance of survival, so too would having a group that you can talk to and trust. And this is where I think The Walking Dead and other fictional series gets things very wrong for the sake of drama. Civilization has been around in one form or another for thousands of years at this point. We've always faced a mix of internal and external threats when we've come together to form groups, and that wouldn't change just because what we think of as modern society has fallen. Sure, there would be those individuals who would take advantage of the lack of laws or law enforcement to do horrible things when given the chance. But overall, groups would reform and rebuild in some fashion. It would be unlikely that things would get back to what we see today anytime in the near future, but a new normal would set in and humans would adapt and overcome those challenges that arose. It's what we've done for thousands of years. The Walking Dead at its core is a story about human resilience, about overcoming obstacles and finding our humanity when all seems lost. The zombies aren't the real monsters, they're just the window dressing. In the long run, the biggest problem we would need to solve would be the fact that everyone is infected and will turn when they die regardless of bite status. This becomes an issue when it comes to people dying in their sleep or in other situations where unexpected things happen. But that's a topic better suited to another video. For now, it's enough to know that being in a group is better for your health than being solo, and that seeking out a group that you trust is a smart move. This line of thinking will drive our choices moving forward. Back on the trail with Jane and Clem, Jane begins trying to plant and cultivate the seeds of distrust of Kenny in Clementine's mind. She insists he's a liability because of the trauma that he's been through. We also get a little more backstory on Jane, learning a little about the relationship between her and her sister and providing a little more insight into how she thinks. Before we can get too deep into that though, they spot a couple of fresh zombies on the ground and spend a few minutes looting them before the muffled sound of Sarah and Luke yelling gets their attention. The voices are coming from a trailer on the other side of the fence, and as they try to narrow down their location, they come across the zombified remains of Nick. It's not entirely clear what killed him, but we can see the bullet wound from earlier in his chest, as well as what appears to be some kind of wound on his leg that could be a bite. After dealing with him and moving into the trailer park, Clem and Jane find the trailer that Luke and Sarah's voices are coming from, surrounded by zombies. They're able to temporarily distract the zombies and slip inside, but the dead quickly surround them once more, and within minutes they're fighting to find a way out as the zombies come through the front door. A skylight in the back bedroom gives them an opportunity to escape, but they are held up by Sarah, who's gone nearly catatonic after seeing her father die. Jane argues that the right thing to do is let the girl die, but is that really the right thing? We've had situations like this with the girl at the motor inn in Season 1, where it could be argued that letting someone die was the right move. There was also the girl in the street in Macon in Season 1, Episode 3, where leaving her to her fate with the zombies made the most sense in the moment. But what about when the person seems to have lost their will to live completely? Not because they were bitten, but just because they're scared and going through a tough time. Should we just give up on someone because they're struggling? Jane's argument is a practical one. Staying longer to try and convince a person who doesn't want to move that they need to leave could mean losing your own life. The instinct for self-preservation is strong, and most people would struggle to help Sarah in a real situation. But what if, instead of being in shock while zombies close in, she was passed out in a burning building? By Jane's logic, a firefighter who would run into that building to save Sarah would be stupid. She should have been strong enough to escape on her own, and if she isn't, then she obviously deserved her fate. When put in that context, it seems a little more obvious that the right thing to do here would be to do everything in our power to save Sarah. She's scared, and she's having trouble coping with everything that's happened in the past few hours, and leaving her to die would be just as bad as killing her ourselves. And this is where we can really see two main paths emerging in the story. Ask yourself what you think Kenny would do, or Lee for that matter, and you'd likely come to the conclusion that they would both say to do everything that you could to save Sarah. Kenny has a strong will to live, and he refuses to give up even when things seem hopeless. His biggest issue with losing Katja was that she, in his words, gave up. He would have done whatever it took to convince her to carry on, and he would likely do the same for Sarah. Conversely, we know what Jane says, and we can make a pretty strong case that Jane's view would fall right in line with someone else that we've recently interacted with: Carver. Carver wouldn't hesitate to leave someone behind who he felt was weak, a detriment to the group. That was his reasoning for killing Reggie. Jane has the same outlook, though she hides it under the guise of being an outcast who prefers to go it alone. Sarah does take a little convincing, but in the end, the group makes it out and back to the camp. On the way back, we finally find out what happened to Jane's sister, Jamie. She'd given up, a lot like Sarah did, and in the end, Jane had to decide whether to keep pushing her to go on or to let her die. Jane chose to save her own life as she couldn't convince Jamie to escape a bad situation. And over time, she's convinced herself that trying to save people isn't worth the effort to justify what she did in her own mind. As they get back to the group, Bonnie pulls Clem aside and asks her if she can talk to Kenny. He's gone into a nearby tent with Sarita and won't talk to anyone. He's seen as the best hope for Rebecca, as he's the only one in the group with any experience in a delivery room, and they need him to snap out of his grief. Clem enters the tent to find a heartbroken Kenny sitting next to Sarita's lifeless body. It's clear he's already done what needed to be done, but there's no indication of his state of mind until you start talking to him. He's calmed down, though he's still struggling. He feels like no matter what he does, life just won't stop hitting him. He's reflecting on the loss of Katja and Duck, and now Sarita. His purpose was protecting them, and in his eyes he keeps failing. He doesn't think he's got anything to live for, but he also can't just give up. Clem, reminding him that Rebecca needs him to help with the baby, helps light a new fire though, and it isn't long before he's out of the tent and working on a plan. Rebecca's water broke, and now time is more limited than ever. The group splits up, with Jane going to search one area and Bonnie and Mike going to another. Clementine has the chance to help both parties, and it doesn't really matter which one she helps first. Going to find Jane, she's found a building that looks like it'll work perfectly as a shelter through the birth. There's a raised platform that would be perfect at helping them watch for the dead, but one of the metal roll-down doors needs to be unlocked before they can do anything. As Jane works to unlock it, Clem spots someone coming. A young man, carrying a bag, is making his way to the tower, and Clem and Jane hide just as he makes it to the top. Going to a trash can in the open area of the tower, the man tries to stuff the bag he's carrying into it. He's having a lot of trouble and winds up spotting Clementine before he's able to fit it in. As he's pointing a gun and speaking to her, mainly in Russian, Jane sneaks up and disarms him, and he drops the bag. Looking inside, Clem sees that it's full of medicine and bottled water, and he insists it's medicine for his sister. The whole situation is incredibly tense, but the story about the medicine doesn't really add up. Why would he be trying to hide it like that? The most likely explanation is that it's stolen and he's trying to hide it from whoever he stole it from until he can come back for it. The fact that he would get as aggressive as he does with Clementine is also indicative of some deception. Why point a gun at a little girl like that and act so hostile? It would be understandable if Kenny or even Jane were the one standing there, but Clem is clearly a child and not a threat on the surface. And you have to choose whether to keep the medicine, which would be helpful for your group and especially Rebecca, or give it back to the man. This is one of those really morally gray areas. Most of us could probably agree that stealing in general is wrong. But we could probably also agree that there are exceptions where it could be justified, like stealing food to feed starving children, or taking medicine to save someone's life. The circumstances are always important when determining right from wrong, and this situation is no different. You have to weigh how much you believe what the man, Arvo, is saying and how much you need the medicine. If he's telling the truth, that it's all needed for his ailing sister, then it would be wrong to just outright steal it from him. After all, we'd probably be pretty angry if we were in Arvo's shoes and needed the medicine for someone important to us. On the other hand, if he's lying, if he stole it himself or is part of a bandit group or has some ill intentions, then taking it from him could even be an overall good thing. Maybe the group he stole it from is tracking him, and they would be thankful that we'd managed to get it back. We saw an instance in 400 Days where a man was trying to steal supplies from the group, where he even brings his group back to attack them if he's set free. How do we know Arvo isn't in a situation like that man was? Maybe he was the scout that managed to get away with the goods, and he's stashing them until he can make it back to his own group to bring them back to get more. The chance isn't worth taking, not given how desperate our group is. Taking the supplies makes the most sense. An argument could even be made for killing the man, but that option isn't available in the game. After finishing up with Jane, Clem makes her way back before going to find Bonnie and Mike. They're exploring the memorial museum, but have yet to find any supplies. Mike is dead set on finding something to take back with them, and with Clem's help they find a jacket for Rebecca and the baby, as well as a couple of 5-gallon water containers. The water doesn't come easy though, as Clementine gets stuck while trying to enter the room they are being stored in, and she might have been bitten by a zombie that was hiding there if not for Mike breaking in at the last minute. Bonnie apologizes, as she'd been the one to insist that Clementine try getting into the room, and she says that she'll never put Clem in a situation like that again. We'll revisit that in the next episode. After nearly catching a raccoon for dinner, they make their way back to the main group. As they return, they find Rebecca dealing with some major labor pains as a small group of zombies closes in. Kenny and Mike hold off the dead while everyone else makes their way to the building that Clem and Jane discovered earlier. Climbing the stairs, Clementine is shocked to discover Jane and Luke sitting in the building. It's clear they've just finished enjoying some private time, and Luke is stumbling over an apology as Kenny rounds the corner with Rebecca and Bonnie. Luke was supposed to be watching for zombies, and Kenny gives him an earful before instructing everyone to hold the dead at bay while Rebecca prepares to have the baby. Everyone who isn't giving birth or assisting goes out onto the deck. As more zombies pile up the stairs, Clementine and Luke try to block the only entrance with a cannon. But the deck winds up being a lot less sturdy than it looks, and it collapses out from under them. Sarah falls to the ground, pinned beneath some of the boards, and Jane is barely hanging on as the dead close in. As Luke tries to pull Jane up, Clem begs her to drop down and help Sarah, who is pleading for someone to free her from the wreckage. It takes some convincing, but Jane finally agrees to help the girl, dropping down and doing her best to free her. Despite her best effort, though, Jane is unable to lift the deck off of Sarah, and she has to retreat up what remains of the deck as the young girl meets a grisly end. The group manages to knock down the little bit of deck that remains attached, giving themselves a reprieve from the dead, and they soon turn their attention back to Rebecca to see what appears to be a stillborn baby resting in Kenny's hands. Everyone is shocked, but the horror turns to joy as the child takes a breath and starts to cry. The next several hours include Jane leaving, saying she doesn't want to stick around to watch Clementine die like she did with her sister and Sarah, and Kenny and Luke fighting about what the best time to move on from the observation deck is. Luke wants to wait a few days, but Kenny points out that they don't have any food and that they need to get some better supplies for Rebecca and the baby. The morning light finds the group, including a very weak Rebecca, walking along the road as snow falls around them. Kenny and Luke are fighting about whether leaving was the right decision, but before they can settle anything, Rebecca collapses. Bonnie helps her over to the side of the road and gets her a seat on an old tire as the group notices that they aren't alone. Someone has emerged from the woods just a little ways down the road and is waving to them. As he draws closer, Clementine realizes it's Arvo. And he isn't alone. A woman with a gun and a pair of armed men come out of the tree line. Their plan is to rob the group, but as a standoff ensues, it's clear that this encounter won't end peacefully. Clementine is trying to calm everyone down as tensions rise, but she's caught off guard when she looks over to see a zombified Rebecca slowly coming to. She's still holding the baby in her arms, and Clem only has a second to react. But the fallout from that gunshot won't be felt until next week. I'm interested in hearing what you thought about episode 4 in the comments down below. Is Jane right about things being better for Clem if she heads out on her own? Was taking the bag from Arvo the right move? What about saving Sarah? We're quickly approaching the end of Season 2, and there's not really that many episodes remaining in the series overall. Once we finish going through the seasons, we're going to be examining some of the other aspects of the game overall. But I'm going to be keeping the Philosophy and Ethics series going with a new game. That game is going to be determined through a series of votes on the Community tab. So make sure you're subscribed and keep an eye out on the Community tab for new posts. I've also got a Patreon, linked in the description below, and channel memberships. So check those things out if you're interested in other ways to support the channel. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.